I've managed to perform almost any type of movement I wanted to do in the last 6.5 years without any serious issues, while experiencing a lot of freedom and enjoyment while doing so. But this wouldn't be possible if I still would had a lot of severe limitations and restrictions around my knees that would have kept me far away from doing the stuff that I can do now. Luckily, I've managed to develop knees that can tolerate pretty high amounts of loads in all of the different positions and configurations I put the knees in, and I do so without needing any warm-ups or having a fear that I might injure my knee or develop some tendon issues along the way. I prioritized one single movement pattern for just a couple of very effective minutes per week that had some very potent effects on my knee joint and its surrounding tissues. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to increase the ability of your knees based on your current capacity to gradually handle more different positions and more loads by performing one single movement pattern for a couple of minutes per week. Now, 10 years ago, when I had a torn ACL and some meniscus issues, it was pretty daunting for me to see anybody cross the knees beyond the toes, where the knee ends up being fully bent as if it was nothing. Just the thought of moving my knees just a couple of millimeters beyond my toes would immediately have my knees scream at me. Yet, it's actually this fear that in hindsight was the number one reason that prevented me from regaining the ability of my knees to express the movements that I wanted to do. Because having knees that can move beyond your toes without any restrictions is actually a sign of a physiological mechanism that is very well developed. And here is why. Your knees are a joint that mostly flexes and extends, and it also has some rotation when it's being bent. But why can it express this flexion and extension? When it's paired with full hip flexion and full dorsiflexion or flexion at the level of your ankle, it can express a deep squat, which is a full compressed position, and it's, for example, also one of the first positions kids learn in order to stand up. And that standing up is the opposite movement trajectory of your joints, which is double extension. Now, if you would add extension of the foot or plantar flexion of the ankle, what movement pattern do you get? You get jumping, which is a triple extension at the level of the ankle, the knee, and the hip. Now, what do you think happens if you avoid engaging in both triple flexion as triple extension? And if you follow this channel for a bit, I think the answer is pretty obvious right now. You would simply be limited in the amount of movement that you can do. For example, movements that require a lot of force production and a lot of acceleration, like sprinting and jumping, would be a lot harder to do, but also your ability to compress and sit in meditative positions like the Sisa, for example, those would offer a greater challenge to you as well. Simply put, the amount of movement you can do is a summation of the degrees of motion at the level of your joints that your brain and nervous system feels comfortable and safe moving into. So if you have less ranges available, you have less movement options. And just to be clear, these safety mechanisms of your brain and the nervous system are not bad. They are actually very important because your brain is always monitoring the position of your body in relation to space to see if you're not in certain positions that potentially could harm your tissues or your skeletal structure. Because nothing would be more harmful to us from an evolutionary perspective to lose the ability to move in certain end ranges and have less movement options. And in this case, reaching full knee flexion without the brain feeling that you're ready to tolerate that load. However, this mechanism works both ways. It protects from harm, but it also allows when it feels ready to perform. So our main job is to align with this very sophisticated and intelligent system and tell it that we're ready to express more range of motion at the level of the knee so that we can regain more movement options in a free and unrestricted manner. And we do so by adhering to one physiological mechanism that tells the brain we're safe. And that is by building strength. And we all know that strength is good to help us build muscle and that we stay healthy long term, right? But have you ever wondered why having strength is so important? Why do we want to have strength? Because strength physiologically is your ability to contract. And contraction is the main communication tool the brain and nervous system uses to communicate with our tissues back and forth. So in essence, when you contract, you have control. And when there is control, the brain always has the option to shut down activity if we're potentially in a position where we might harm ourselves. Now for the knee, this means two things. First, we want to strengthen the knee in a full range of motion. Now, two, we want to provide a strong stimulus so that the brain feels safe, that we own that range, and that the body feels inclined to change our tissues so that we create more buffers to tolerate higher demands over time. And I found that the sissy and sisa movement pattern is one of the most effective ways to align with the two. Because if you look closely to the movement pattern, as we descend towards the ground, you can see that we reach more and more flexion, which we can do all the way until we're fully flexing the knee. And this descent grants us the opportunity to strengthen more knee flexion over time. And we can increase the demand very simply by just leaning backwards or opening the hip into more hip extension. And we can continue this descent by bringing the knees on the ground, flattening the foot, and continuing this pattern. Now the key part here, no matter your physical capacity or your current range of motion that you can move into, is that you provide a very strong stimulus, because if there's not a potent enough signal, the body and brain doesn't feel the necessity to start adapting the tissues surrounding the knee. Now let me give you a full demonstration of how I like to implement this. Now, before showing you the full demo, if you have certain restrictions like with the knee or other regions of your joints, I created a quick assessment to help you find out whether certain positions would require a bit more of your attention than others. And this is all to help you create more focus and have more clarity if you're pursuing more mobility or more functional movement without pain. You can download it in the link below, or if you want to speed up the process, there's also a link to apply to the program. Now let's get back to the demo. Now with the sissy and sisa pattern, the main tissues and joints that we're working are from the legs. And this means that we have the arms available for support. And that is critical because they act as our safety net. And I'm going to use them by standing next to a wall, door frame, or a pillar. And in this case, I'm using a wall, and I also have a chair available for the other arm. Then I first want to explore my tolerable range. So the range where I feel safe. And of course, this might differ from you, but the principle that we're applying stays the same. I lower all the way down until I think I'm stuck and I can't go up. Then I rely more on my hands to offload the pressure on my knees. Then I bring my knees to the ground while being upright. Then I repeat this descent while having the feet flat, but I lean a bit more backwards to increase the demand. I again stop when my body doesn't want to go any further. I rely on the hands and I bring myself upright. I curl back the toes in and I transition to the position prior. If this would be too hard, I would just taking a step to re-enter the sissy squat position. Then I go upwards with a lot of support of my arms. And when I'm now upright, it means I have a fallback mechanism. I always have a way to get out of the position in a safe manner. Next is going in for the full ride. Now I'm going to increase the demand by leaning back, so I'm opening up more of the hips, and then I lower. When I feel sensations emerge in the knees, I slightly bring myself forward by hinging at the level of the hips, so I can lower again. I keep doing so until I'm back at end range, where I then bring more weight on my arms and transition the knees to the ground. I do the same thing with the sisa position. I lean back as much as I can, and every time I feel a little bit more sensation at the knee, I hinge a little until I reach my final position. Now, when I go back up, I still try to remain this backward lean or this open position of the hips every part of the pattern until I'm back in this upright sisa position. I then curl the toes back, I rely on the arms, and I lean backwards. Then I push up. And when I'm stuck, I slightly hinge, but I keep myself as close to that sticking point as possible. I can also use more support of the arms, of course. I do this all the way to the top. So this completes one rep. And as you can see, I do it with a lot of intensity within the range of motion that my body currently allows me to move into. I do this for 2 to 3 reps in total, and then I've completed this for the entire week. Now, whatever I do, I make sure that I supply myself with a very, very strong stimuli, again, in that range of motion of the pattern for 2 to 3 reps per week. For me, this means that I'm now working with a 20 kilogram weight on the way down and on the way up. And I support myself with my arms, or I decrease the hip angle only when I need it. Now for you, this might be something entirely different. You might just go slightly up and down in both patterns, and that is already enough. That already gives you a strong enough stimuli. But the core idea I want you to remember is that the brain and body, they want to feel safe. A strong stimulus provides that safe signal. And in the more range you can provide that stimulus, the more buffers and safety you're creating, which over time allows you to express more and more movement freedom in the knees in its flexed position. Now, hopefully this video gave you a clear strategy on how to improve the strength of your knees to regain certain abilities and to potentially reduce some restrictions and pains that you currently have, like I had, that you can implement right away. Now, you can test this out for yourself, see how it goes, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments and I will respond to you with the best in my abilities. And for the rest, speak soon and have an awesome day.